Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, which is directed by Mariel Heller, who also made Can You Ever Forgive Me? It's inspired by a Tom Juno article, which was called Can You Say Hero? TV entertainer Fred Rogers, who was largely unknown here, I think, until there was a documentary recently and until the Tom Hanks film came out. There is a journalist who is sent to interview him. In America, he's a legend. He was kind of a symbol of everything that was good and right and noble. Over here, I didn't know anything about him until I met him in this film. And so we have a journalist called Lloyd Vogel, who is known to be somebody who dishes the dirt on his subjects. He's somebody who apparently, once he's done a piece on somebody, they'll never speak to him again. And he is going through a whole bunch of personal crises involving a number of things in his own life. And he is sent to interview Fred Rogers for a magazine article, for a piece in which they're doing things about heroes. And he is deeply suspicious of Fred Rogers, as indeed was I when I first met him, because I didn't know anything about him. I knew nothing about his persona at all. So he goes to meet him, and what he wants to do is he wants to write a piece that's, like a proper journalism piece, but he's been told that he has to do this. And once he meets Rogers, he becomes completely bewildered as to whether or not he's for real. Here's a clip.
This piece will be for an issue about heroes. Do you consider yourself a hero?
I don't think of myself as a hero. No, not at all.
What about Mr. Rogers? Is he a hero?
I don't understand the question.
Well, there's you, Fred, and then there's the character you play, Mr. Rogers.
You said it was a play at the plate. Is that what happened to you?
I'm here to interview you, Mr. Rogers.
Well, that is what we're doing, isn't it?
It's very astute. He's so great because when you hear little bits of the conversation out of context, but you can hear the character of Mr. Rogers deflecting and not wanting to go too deep in that interview. I think it's really, really interesting, and it was worth watching it quite a few times.
So then what happens is that he realises quite quickly that he's met somebody who he thinks is kind of impenetrable, and he wants to get behind the mask. And as the drama goes on, he starts to wonder about whether there is a mask or whether the front that's being presented by Fred Rogers is real. Now, the character of Fred Rogers is real, and there was indeed a magazine article that this was based on, as I said, the Tom Juno article. And Tom Juno has said, he's talked about this quite recently, that his encounter with Fred Rogers changed his life, that he did start to see the world differently as a result of meeting this character who about whom I think at first he was very sceptical. In the drama, there is the fictional Lloyd Vogel, whose own personal troubles are amplified for dramatic purposes. So Lloyd comes to be a kind of fictionalized version of the actual journalist who went to interview Fred Rogers. And what happens in his life and the way in which Fred Rogers interacts with his life is like a kind of, a larger than life version of what was happening with Tom Juno. And if there's a weakness in the film, and I want to do this first because otherwise I'm just going to gush about the film. If there is a weakness in the film, and I think there is, it's that the character of Fred Vogel is written in a much more dramatic contrivance way. He's given backstory that feels like dramatic backstory. He's given a very particular set of issues that he's dealing with as he comes into contact with Fred Vogel. And they did feel to me, they smacked to some extent of dramatic license, of artifice. But the weird thing is that none of that actually bothered me while I was watching the film, because like Fred Vogel, like Lloyd Vogel, I was so completely mesmerised by the spectacle of Tom Hanks's Fred Rogers, who is almost like this kind of Zen master. What was the phrase that Tom Hanks used when he was describing it? He said aggressive kindness. When you interviewed him.
Yeah, something like that.
And there is something when you first meet him that is really weirdly passive-aggressive. The fact that when Lloyd turns up, he thinks he's going to have an hour with him and he ends up getting like 5 minutes. And then he's told, well, maybe we'll meet sort of later on. The fact that he goes into a world which appears to be completely controlled by Fred. He's surrounded by all these TV people who are kind of frustrated by the fact that it takes him forever to get the scene done. But because it is his world that he's created. And yet, I was trying to think of another actor other than Tom Hanks who could have made that character feel as real as it does. And the answer is James Stewart and that's it. And I know that it's the old cliche to say that Tom Hanks has the thing that James Stewart had, which is weird because actually James Stewart played a lot of very disturbing, very strange roles, worked with Hitchcock and all that sort of stuff. But that sense of somebody who exudes a kind of almost aggressive benignness is something that I think very few actors could pull off. And I think Hanks does it. And the film is funny and it is really weird. I mean, particularly for a British audience, I'm sure it's very different for an American audience. Because if you're an American audience, you're already familiar with the character, you would know, I think, that the general impression of the film is that, I mean, when I first met him, not knowing anything at all, when you have that first conversation, it wouldn't have surprised me if the film turned into 1 hour photo. The Robin Williams film in which he's not Robin Williams at all. He's actually something much more creepy and dark than that. And there is a wonderful moment in it when he's talking to Lloyd about, what happens to all the anger, what happens to all the negative feeling, what happens to all those things that broil inside you. And he says, well, you can get them out by, playing all the bass notes on a piano. And then there is a moment later on in the film in which you just see him on the set and he goes, and it's a really beautifully set up moment because what it tells you is that underneath that passive, tranquil surface, all those things that always were there are still there, but he's just learnt to deal with them. Sorry, you're about to read an email. I'm sorry.
No. When you're done.
So I think it's a really strange, really interesting, really odd, flawed, but really oddly uplifting film.
Oh, it's beautiful.